Thank you very much. My name is Reilly Brennan. I'm the executive director of the Revs Program at Stanford, and been close to putting the conference on with our friends from the Journalism Program and the Center for Automotive Research. And the first panel was really fantastic. And when we were putting this together, it's funny because we started to receive messages from some technologists who said, why are there all these journalists here? And then some of the journalists said, why are there all these technologists here? And that's, I think, the reason why the first panel was really great. And so when we were putting together the roster for this one, you know, it doesn't seem natural that these people would kind of fit together. And I think that speaks to the sort of raw, wild, wild west area that we're playing in with some of this data. And in fact, you know, just before we jumped up here, the conversations between our three panelists were fantastic. So I'm really excited about having them here for the next hour. I'm going to introduce all three of them, and then we're going to bring up our first panelist, Adam Altman. So to start, Adam Altman is currently the head of product for Automatic, the leading consumer connected car company. He oversees the core platform direction as well as their APIs and data platform, which power ecosystem applications. He has an incredible track record of building things as an entrepreneur and an investor, and holds degrees in cognitive science from the college at UPenn, and in economics and info management from the Wharton School at UPenn. Next up is Charlie Catlett, who's director of the Urban Center for Computation and Data, University of Chicago, Argonne National Laboratory. He is also the leader for the forthcoming Array of Things project in the city of Chicago, a network of interactive modular sensor boxes around Chicago which collect real-time data on the city's environment, infrastructure, and activity for research and public use. Charlie is the founding director of the Urban Center for Computation and Data, Urban CCD, which brings scientists, artists, architects, technologists, and policymakers together to use computation, data analytics, and embedded systems to pursue insight into the dynamics, design, and sustainable operation of cities. He's also a senior computer scientist at Argonne National Laboratory and a senior fellow at the Computation Institute of the University of Chicago and Argonne National Laboratory. Finally, at the end of our row here is Diane Eisnor, who's VP of Platform and Partnership at crowdsourced navigation and real-time traffic startup Waze, which was recently acquired by Google. And Diane is a neo-geographer. She's a pioneer in this space, employing all means to increase the world's citizen mappers. In addition to being active in a few nonprofits and showing her psychogeography-inspired art in the US and Europe, her entrepreneurial passions lie with community development, urban exploration, community cartography, and social mapping. In fact, she believes social mapping to be a critical tool for cultural diplomacy. So with that, I'll introduce our first panelist, Adam Altman.
Hi, guys. Great. Good morning. Thanks for all being here today. I have some slides to show you guys. Oh, we're bouncing through. So great. I wanted to just spend a few minutes familiarizing you guys with what we're doing at Automatic to give you some context so that the bulk of the time we spend talking through the questions you all have about this panel topic. So I'm the head of product at Automatic, automatic.com. And what we do, we make this device. I have one here. It's this big. I assume some of you in the audience are familiar with the OBD port and some are not. So every car in the US since 1996 and in other countries at varying dates are mandated to have a port, usually under the steering wheel, a little bit to the left or right. That's like, think of it as a huge USB. And that gives you direct access into the car's central computer, the ECU, to pull out engine stats, drivetrain stats, and the state of the car. In addition to that, we put some additional sensors in here, accelerometer, GPS, Bluetooth so you can connect to the phone, and a speaker so we can give audio feedback. A bunch of other technical things, but to the interest of generating data feeds, that's sort of it. That allows us to get out of the engine things like speed, RPM, fuel economy, fuel usage. The accelerometer adds in G-forces, hard brakes, hard accelerations are things you can derive out of that. And I'm sort of glossing over some of the longer tail things, but you get the idea. So that connects over Bluetooth to your smartphone, and we use the smartphone's data connection to pipe that up to our cloud. Why? Well, why we founded the company is different from what some people may know us for right now, and I'm happy to explain that here. So our view of the world is we believe cars are going to have apps. There's all of these touch points, and I'm just listing out the ones that sort of exist today, not including the ones that will come because of things like this being opened up. But the average American spends about $8,000 to $10,000 per year owning and operating a vehicle, right? Gas, insurance, maintenance, and parking are the big four, and then there's a long tail out beyond that of other things. We've seen in the last few years Uber take the notion of taxi as an industry and appify that, build a brand around it, build an amazing business around this service that was previously had a lot of dollars flowing through it, but wasn't digital, wasn't appified, wasn't branded. And we feel that all of these major touch points, it has the necessary ingredients to see that same transition. It has a lot of dollars flowing, it has room for innovation, and consumers are increasingly living their sort of transactional experiences through curated brands. So how is that going to happen? And there's a lot of discussion about how cars get connected and what's that going to mean, and is it infotainment, or is it insurance, or is it whatever. So we're focused on primarily those sort of transactional touch points, things that you already have to do. And people say, what's the business model? To us, the business model is making an existing transaction better. So how do you do that? Well, we believe interoperability requires a platform of sorts. And we work with certain automakers and think that they're going to do fantastic things in connected car, but we don't think the interoperable platform to connect up these transactional services comes from them. The reason for that is if you're an application developer, you need to be able to speak to all cars on the road, or as many of them as possible. That means across OEMs and across new and old. So old is a thing that's overlooked a lot in these talks about the future of connected car. Most cars on the road today, most cars coming off the line today, do not have meaningful connectivity in them. Even if they have a hotspot in it, or they're streaming Pandora in something, they don't actually have APIs that let you access, let a developer access the data coming off of the engine. And that's sort of our unique value add here. Cars in the US live for about 12.5 years on the road on average. So even if you imagine that great connectivity started coming out in every car next year, which would be a stretch, it'd be 6.5 years before you had a majority of cars on the road being able to access. So we think the internet for cars, the whole suite of applications, can come much sooner, and we want to be a central part of that. So I'll just sort of jam through these to give some flavor. We give a flagship application with our product, but that is meant to be one of many that you use, sort of in the same way that the early providers of internet into your home, think AOL and Prodigy, they had to give you a reason, a use case for why this would be desirable. And over time, that all got consumed by the broader internet and the suite of applications that now take up our daily lives. So our flagship application provides this sort of list of features, and in the interest of time, I won't detail into them too much, but we feel everybody who has any car on the road, new or old, deserves to be able to have these features. But the interesting bit to us, relevant to this panel, is all of the additional applications that can be powered by that data that's coming off. And so we make all the data available through APIs. These are not to say that we have a thing with Twitter and so forth. It's just thematic of the concept. What I will show you, so one of our own internal applications is our web dashboard. It's the same data that's available in the mobile phone app, but available for sort of more rich analysis and filtering and exporting. Directly exporting so that consumers can take it and do whatever they want with. We're a very big hit with the quantified self crowd. We did a partnership with Ford earlier last year that enabled, it's actually a small technical step, but a very big deal for us especially, and hopefully for Ford, who's in the audience, that we were able to work together to enable the Ford sync button in cars to power the Apple experience with Siri. That was actually not really possible before, and we found a weird workaround way to make our Ford Sync talk to our device talk to the iPhone, and we made something that wasn't possible before possible. Big, in the Silicon Valley, very early adopter tech crowd, IFT was one of our first integration partners, and they built a channel so that enabled hundreds of potential applications. For those not familiar, IFT is sort of a connected device middleware, connected service middleware, I should say, that lets you build recipes. If something happens, if it is raining, pulled from some API, then text me to bring an umbrella. So they can now say, if my car turns on in this geofenced location, if I get an engine error code, then do the following things, right? Post a picture of a cat to Twitter, or contact my mechanic, or tell my wife my location on my way home. I think one of the ones that usually gets people's attention, nice headlines, is if I park in front of a Nevada brothel, text my wife immediately. That's a real recipe on there. So out of that grew, it's a very rich prototyping ground, and one of the more popular recipes there was with Nest, automatic to IFT to Nest. So that actually spawned Nest reaching out to us and saying, hey, this is great, people are using this. Wouldn't it be better if we could do that directly? Not just to cut out a middleman, but rather to build a richer use case. It's not just if this, then that, but if a whole bunch of, you can give richer filters and more predictive sort of things. So we enabled a direct connection to Nest and found our users to sort of love that use case. It's the coolest thing you can do with it is predictive arrival time. When you can set it up so that when you're leaving your office on a weekday afternoon, when your car turns on, it starts pinging over your ETA to your house based off of Google traffic kind of things. And Nest has a concept of when is the right exact moment to turn your thermostat on to get your house from current state to ideal state. So we built that out and found people to really be enjoying that. This is a little app. This, I think, has a team of 4, so this might be the biggest publicity they've gotten. It goes down on the regular, but we're encouraging, better things for them to come. But they built a really cool thing. They mapped out all of the street sweeping parking rules in San Francisco and built an app that would let you check yourself in and tell you if you needed to move your car to avoid a ticket. That's cool, but you need to open the app and pin yourself, which sort of breaks the user experience for most people. So you can sign in with Automatic, and when you do that, we ping over your park location every time your ignition turns off. They check it, and it all happens in the background. I don't open this app, I just get push notifications. Hey, you need to move your car in 30 minutes or less. Really cool. This is a use case that was built called License Plus. I'm just giving these examples to show you the breadth of sort of applications that are possible that steer away from what I think are the obvious ones, but it's worth calling out. Maybe I just spend too much time in the space. The obvious ones are around maintenance and insurance and parking, and we're definitely tackling some of those. I can't comment too publicly on some of the work we're doing there, but you will be hearing big things this year. Back to this, License Plus is an experience for new teenage drivers. It's a curriculum, basically, that can help parents and new teens negotiate that sort of anxiety of letting your child out into the world. And it's a course that lets you prove to the parent over time certain skills that have been achieved and so forth. Very creative experience that was made possible by the data coming out of the port as a sort of check on the fact that you are in fact doing these things. We did a thing with Jawbone, I'll skip over it because in the interest of time, and there's dozens and dozens more applications coming this year. I think I saw a slide earlier with numbers of apps developed. We have about a dozen or so brand partner apps live that our users are using, although we haven't made a ton of noise about them yet. We're still putting a few things in place and then are going to make some noise in a couple of months. But then, the really interesting thing to see is the individual developer and what they do with that, the hacker, the weekend projector. And those, I think we have roughly 1,000 developer apps where somebody has a unique single-purpose thing that they want, and it's the way they want it. And some of those will probably stay that way, and some of them may actually grow into businesses or inspire us to, build features or bring them on the team, who knows. What's really interesting, and maybe getting closer to what this panel's about, is where we think our massive opportunity to have impact on the world is, and that's through the aggregate data. We are pulling in so much data. I won't, you've heard the numbers, but Waze definitely has a larger network of cars and so forth, but if you limit down to the set of people who have the the types of data that we do, not just location, but hard acceleration and speeding info and fuel economy at 1 hertz is how often we're collecting that. I believe it's safe to say we are the largest deploy in the world. So what you're looking at here is just a sample thing. We put out a map of where do people hard brake in San Francisco, and you can see these little heat maps of what are the most dangerous intersections. So I know some of you may spend time up in the city, and it's not surprising. You get the most hard brakes where you get the most cars, so like coming off the 101 right at Market Street and things like that. But if you adjust hard brakes per sort of car capita, the most dangerous intersection, as judged by frequency of hard brakes, is Diamond Heights, the Safeway. Any of you know it? You turn out and there's this crazy intersection that I see some nods. Yeah. It's like a guaranteed accident when you're coming out of that. And so we're able to see that and visualize that with data, which is something that cities can be very interested in to help them understand how things are flowing. Just to give you a sense of where we are right now as a company, we've been in market for about 1.5 years. We're sold in Apple, Best Buy, Target, Walmart, maybe not yet, but soon, Amazon, and on our own site. We don't release absolute numbers, but we can sort of ballpark it and say users are driving millions of miles per day in our system. If you take a look at the left-hand side of this, that's a map trace of San Francisco on a typical week for us, or the Bay Area. Essentially, we touch 100% of roads. There are no roads on this map. This is just path traces from our system. And that is sort of maybe expected for a tech company at our stage in this area. The right-hand side is Minneapolis. And that I like to put up as a contrast to say, we can zoom out and most all of the country is lit up. This has still a long ways to go. We're nowhere near even 1% of penetration of American vehicles, but it's crossed over the Bay Area and ultra-urban, tech elite to be something that we are starting to have a very rich data set in basically every metro area here. So what could you do with that data? Lots and lots of things. So we can use this data sort of in the same way Waze does to reduce traffic, because we can sort of predict traffic patterns in the same way. We have data around people's driving behavior, and there are ways that incentive programs can be put in place for them through insurance, through cities with HOV lanes and tolls and things like that to provide interesting incentives. And then, as I was giving the Safeway example, to identify dangerous roads and help fix them. OEMs have come to us, Ford, some people there have actually said, you guys seem to have a larger data set than we do about how our own cars are actually performing out there in the field. Now that exact thing may change over time as they roll more connectivity into their new cars, but for the old ones, right, it's very hard to know how things perform once they roll off the lot. We have that, and we can go back and help vehicle development actually become more informed and more efficient. And of course, I'm sure this will draw a lot of questions, but I'm happy to answer them. Everything is fair game about data privacy and business models and all of that. But there is a very rich set of data coming off that enables what I want to call recommendation engines. Like that's a dangerous term. I do not mean advertising to the customers in a way that's adversarial or as a nuisance, but going back to our business model, I said we focus on those transactions that already exist and how could we make them better. And the data there that's available both at the individual level and in aggregate lets us know how to make those better. We're able to compare you to all users in your metro area, or in your metro area in your exact vehicle type, or to match we could already see there's a lot of companies cropping up around carpool matching, right? Knowing who would be a good match to go to work together. We have those in our system. It's not our business. We're not going to focus on that, but we could power those sorts of applications by looking at the data in aggregate. So that's automatic. I think I probably went over time, sorry, but it hopefully set some context for you to ask questions that are on your mind. Thanks.
So So that was sort of, when I saw automatic, sort of like Fitbit for the car. What we're trying to do in Chicago is like Fitbit for the city. And it started out as a science project with Argonne National Laboratory and the University of Chicago and about a dozen partners from universities to try to understand the city from a variety of different standpoints, its impact on the regional climate, air quality, and how traffic affects that, and even the movement of vehicles and pedestrians through the city. It's a project that has gone through a couple of different rounds of prototyping. We have a handful of them that are mounted in Chicago right now on in private locations, and then in the springtime we'll start to roll out in 2 major waves over the next 30 months to get 500 of these around the city. So I'll tell you what these are in just a moment. But the basic idea is to provide a way for the city to give information to itself, to residents, to drivers about the state of the city. Now, as I mentioned, one of the things that we want to understand about the city is air quality, and these are maps of, on the left-hand side, air quality stations in the city of Chicago, and then a count of the types of sensors that they have, and you can see it's not very rich in terms of data we have about air quality, and it certainly doesn't cover even the 580 square kilometers of the city itself, a portion of which is shown here. And then in the downtown area, if you want to know something about weather, those are the weather underground stations. You tend to see in these do-it-yourself kind of sensing pretty good deployment out into residential areas, but when you try to put sensors or any device on a street corner in the downtown area of a major city, it is a significant undertaking. And so the Array of Things project started with us attempting to put air quality sensors throughout the downtown area and realizing that there is really no practical way to do that without starting with permitting and getting permission to get power and internet and all that stuff. So I went to the city of Chicago and said, you know, you could make the city of Chicago a test bed for Internet of Things, for smart cities, for understanding cities in general, if you would work with us to put a enclosure that's secure from curious hands and baseball bats, with power and internet, a set of these throughout the city. What you see here is a mock-up of, we've built a dozen of these prototype devices that'll go on the University of Chicago campus over the next few weeks. I'll show you in a moment what that looks like on the inside and what will eventually go out on the street poles this spring. Should also mention Array of Things is kind of an odd name. The newspaper writers thought that was a strange name. You've heard of Internet of Things, and the city of Chicago is very interested in making the city a test bed for Internet of Things. From the science world, we think about array telescopes. An array telescope lets you see very far in very great detail as a function of the number of components of that array. So when we think about the Array of Things, it's an instrument for observing the city. That's where that strange name came from. We also are looking at other ways to push technology out into the city so that we get more data about air quality and about other things with the city. So we've been working with Big Belly. You've probably seen these solar-powered connected garbage cans. They came to us last fall and said, we'd kind of like to put some sensors in. And we said, you've come to the right place. So we are working with them to get our, not our entire package, but the sensors out into these. And that means that, because the agreement is that they will make the data public and free, as will all of our data be. That means every time they ship one of these at a couple hundred a month, we get another place in another city where we have some information about air quality and whether or whatever we decide to put into these things as sensors. We built this, this device based on a couple of years of internal research and development at Argonne National Laboratory in a project called Waggle, which is a reference to the dance that a honeybee makes to tell the rest of the hive where the honey is. And the idea is that you have these remote devices in the field in places where it is not convenient or even in some cases possible to go out and maintain them. So think like deep space probes. You really want to make sure that these devices can self-heal, you anticipate the ways that they will fail, and then build in resilience based on that. So the underlying principle of the nodes in the array of things then is that we should put them up on street poles and not have to go back to them until we want to replace them with something new and better. The agreement with the city of Chicago, by the way, is to put 500 of these up, and they will do that work for us and not charge us. They will power these devices. They'll go on street signal light poles about 13 feet above the sidewalk, both for protecting the box and also because that's where it's convenient for them to bring power out of the pole. And that will happen over the course of the next 30 months. And I think I say some things later about other conversations we're having with other cities. Basic architecture of what's inside the box, a couple of very powerful single board computers called Odroid that have a 4-core ARM processor. I realize I'm speaking not journalism terms. It's like a Raspberry Pi. How many people know what a Raspberry Pi is? Not the thing you eat? Okay, it's a single board computer, size of a deck of cards. This is like a grown-up Raspberry Pi. Very powerful. And it allows us to do a couple things. One is to control all the other devices inside the box, including devices that would be hosted by companies or research projects that want to experiment in the city of Chicago. So the idea is to replace these every year with new devices. And the other is to do in situ processing of signal, audio, and video data eventually, so that you could have a code that runs in the box that you download and experiment with new algorithms for doing signal processing, and say point the camera, for example, point the camera at this scene, and then you have a baseline image of the scene, and you look at what you're seeing now, and you say, oh, well, based on this compared to the baseline image, it looks like it's foggy, or there's light snow coming. It has infrared that points to the sidewalk. That will tell us, and there's one pointing straight up as well, sidewalk will tell us, is there ice on the street? The one pointing up will tell us what the cloud cover is. And you might want to process those kind of image streams as well, because if you've got thermal image, then you also know something about movement of, let's say, pedestrians or vehicles. Here's what one looks like outside as undressed. It doesn't have his enclosure on. As I said, we've prototyped this through 2 generations. In the upper right is what the devices will look like on the pole. So we're going smaller. I have to say, I have a lot of respect for companies like Automatic that make physical devices, because I come from the software world where making 100 of something is really easy. You just hit copy. But making 100 of a physical thing is not so easy. So we have to move from these handmade prototypes like you see here with, you can see there's this chassis that you bolt all the parts to. We have to move to a mass manufacturable version like this one at the bottom that can be injection molded, et cetera, et cetera. So the work in the next 6 months is to make that transition, because the one on the left takes about 6 hours to assemble from the point that you put the plastic into the vacuum former to the point that all your things are bolted to it. The one on the right we think will take around 30 to 40 minutes to assemble, and so we've got partners in Chicago that are ready to do that for us, and at that point we'll be able to start pushing these out, ranging in price from $750 to $1,500 based on what sensors you want to have in them. We'll start pushing those out this summer, and again, the first 500 being in Chicago. So our general rollout then, you can see here on the left, I won't read it to you, partly because I don't have my reading glasses on and couldn't if I wanted to, but we are talking to 9 other cities. Yes, and I list them here. An interesting thing about those conversations is that each city has a different reason for wanting this kind of technology, but almost all of them are super interested in air quality. Los Angeles, they're interested in air quality and noise around the port and the airport. We have community groups in Chicago that have come to the city and said, hey, we heard about this array of things thing. We want them in our neighborhood because we have a noise problem in our neighborhood, and we want to be able to have you look at the data and actually do something about it, not just wait for us to call 311 a certain number of times. Umeå in Sweden and Bolzano in Italy are under pressure, as are other European cities, to use traffic management to reduce the emissions inside the city center. So there's some questions there that would inform policy that we don't have good answers to yet, partly because we don't have the spatial and temporal resolution of data that projects like this will give us. So one question, if you're Umeå, it's a city of 150,000, is do you need 5 sensors around the city, or do you need 500? And if you stop all traffic into the city and it takes 2 days for the air to clear, then that tells you that dynamic policies aren't going to really help you very much. So you want to understand how the different emissions or different pollutants move through the city and on different timescales. And a separate project with my center that we've been doing for a longer period of time with the city of Chicago is making open data more accessible to people who are not data scientists. And so working with the former CIO for the city, Brett Goldstein, we rolled this platform out at the Code for America Summit last September called Plenario. You'd have to ask the software developers why we have that name. I don't have that power to name products. But here's an example of a mock-up. But this is what, I don't remember what the data actually is, but I changed it to air quality for illustration purposes. But this tool allows you to draw on a map an area or a path that you're interested in. It goes out and it finds in all the open data portals what data is available and then presents it to you and allows you to combine data together, download it for machine learning and other kinds of analytics. So this kind of map would be reasonably interesting to the city, and if the city, based on air quality like this, could send a message out to people through Automatic or Waze and say, like if I leave my house in the morning and it says, you know, emissions are really bad this morning, so we'll give you $1 off on taking the train in, or if you wait 30 minutes, that'd be better. So here's $1 off on Starbucks at your, at your location. This kind of thing would allow our point of view anyway is that the city shouldn't be controlling. The city's not a machine where you control all the people like their packages moving through FedEx, but you want to give them information, assuming that they will act on that information in a way that it gives you sort of a global optimization. And Waze is a good example of that. Also, in the spirit of Fitbit, on the left-hand side is what you get right now from some of these things like many of us are wearing. Number of steps per week, I find, pretty interesting for the first week, after which not very interesting. But if I could see my exposure to emissions over a period of time, I might be more interested in that, and I might be interested in maps like this. Again, not real data because we haven't deployed yet. Maps like this that would say, well, here's what happened with you today. You went from the train station over to actually to the right-hand side, doesn't matter where it is. In the middle of the day, you went up to City Hall, and at the end of the day, you went over to the train station again. But you took this red route with really bad emissions, and if you take this other route, you can reduce your emissions exposure over the course of the year by some percentage. Just in closing, just to answer some questions in case I haven't already, how often are we collecting or sampling the data? And the goal is to do this every 30 seconds. We may find that that's more often than we need, but that's essentially the design spec for the devices. City of Chicago has a policy that they do not monetize their data, and we're very much part of that partnership with the city, and we believe in that as well. And so all the data free immediately to everyone. We will encourage, one of the sources will be the City of Chicago data portal. And as with that data portal, we encourage innovation around that data. And then the hardware, the software, I could have gone into detail. We had to design several printed circuit boards, including a super duper power supply, real-time clock, watchdog timer, etc. All of that is open source. The software is open source. It's not there yet, but will be out in GitHub. And so we expect that this platform might be used by other people as is, or they may want to modify it to their own end. So thank you for letting me talk about this project.
I don't have slides. You can stop it there. So for anyone who doesn't know what Waze is, it's a free app for your smartphone that provides navigation and real-time traffic. It's all crowdsourced. We have more than 50 million users around the world. And so what you just saw there was a glimpse of the sheer volume of data that we're able to collect in that period of time. And this is information from actual drivers on the road where we're trying to understand the speed at which they're going, because our goal as a company is to save people time every day. And that's by routing you around bad traffic, an accident that may happen, by making that commute just a little bit smoother. That was really inspiring, these last two talks. And this is a pretty good segue, because what I wanted to talk about today is not just the idea that we can save individuals time, which is obviously our core mission, but now that we are at the point where we're collecting this much information, it's the so what stage. What are we going to do with that? And as we started thinking about that, a few things happened. And as always with a startup, you can't predict when these things are going to happen or where your primary use cases will come from. Your user base tells you, and in some cases, other situations in the world will tell you. So during Hurricane Sandy, or it turned into Superstorm Sandy, we got a call from the White House. And they said, we don't know which gas stations have power. We hear that the lines are 3 and 4 hours long. We know that you have a lot of users there. Is there anything you can do to help? And so that was the first time we thought, okay, we can send a push notification by geography to those users and ask them for help. Because Waze is crowdsourced, there's this idea that people are sharing information just by turning the app on and driving. In many cases, it's anonymous unless you choose to share. But we have a lot of information. And so we sent that push notification, and we got 10,000 responses over the course of the weekend about fuel stations that were open, where was power, and FEMA could use that information to figure out where to send their fuel trucks. Now, this is not the kind of thing we could have predicted. This is not why we built the application, but it's the kind of things that can be built on top of a robust platform. A little while later, the city of Rio de Janeiro approached us because they had the Pope coming to visit, and they were very worried about safety and security, and it's not a kind of rich city that has sensors in the roads, and even the rich cities only have sensors in the highways, usually not on the secondary roads, so it's very difficult to have some insight into what's happening where. So we had a very bad API that we were able to give them. By bad, I mean not well documented, not very refined. But anyway, they were able to, within 2 weeks, get Waze data. And by data, I mean the stuff that's publicly available within our app, so the incidents and the road closures, into their primary traffic management center so they could have some sense of what was happening and where. That sparked us to begin thinking about what's now called the Connected Citizens Program. And we only launched this past October. We launched it with 10 cities, called it the W10, and it was a data exchange. And it was to try to answer the question, what do we do now with all of this data? So we shared our incident and closure data, not just with Rio, but the rest of the 10 cities. And then we were able to get that same information back into our own application, so that, you know, for our own users, what's good is if we're not the application that's going to send you over the closed bridge. And no navigation service has ever gotten that right. Just the sheer volume of information you need about what's happening on the roads has been too vast. So that's the direction we're heading. So this data exchange program has been very valuable for us, and then also for our partners. We've now scaled up to 23 partners, and that includes in the US, Boston, Los Angeles, the NYPD, specifically in New York, but also worldwide. It's Rio, it's Jakarta, it's a number of the cities that you saw here, it's Barcelona, Sydney, Australia. So we wanted to make sure that we were working with a variety of cities and local governments around the world so that we understand it, we could understand the nuances and traffic behavior, and really try to figure out if there's a way we can impact our congestion. We would like to reduce congestion. We say we want to save you 5 minutes a day. We've never been able to prove it, right? We have lots of anecdotal feedback, but we'd like a way to measure this, and working with the cities should be able to put us on that kind of a path. So I have a video that I want to show you about the work that we're doing in Rio. But before we get there, I want to just talk about what we're doing in the program, why it's called the Connected Citizens Program and not the Connected Cities Program, which is what most are called. And I think if we think back to this idea of smart cities and how it's been woven in, it's been very top-down thinking, right? A city will decide what kind of information they want to collect. They'll hire a very large company to come in and tell people how to do it and essentially offer citizens whatever information is left over from that relevant experience. We wanted to start from our user base, but really the citizen base. How do we make sure that it's the people that are informed? And then by sharing this information with cities, they are under some kind of obligation to be able to respond to that information. Because once citizens realize, okay, I reported a pothole, I reported an accident, what are you going to do about it? Now that you know as a city, how long is it going to take you to fix that pothole? How are you going to make sure that you can respond to all of this data that's coming in? So the great thing about our partners is that they're all committed to doing that. And the how is pretty cool. So the first time we got all of our cities together in person was in October when we launched the program. And immediately we realized that we were responsible for bringing them together, but we were really the least interesting thing at the table. The most interesting thing was each other for them. How are they going to be able to share this knowledge and best practices? And so they actually started a forum that we help facilitate. They're sharing code. We have our own mini GitHub where if they create a data visualization tool for one city, they're openly sharing it with the other members of the program. If somebody does a research project, they're sharing the results immediately. So what we have is a worldwide collaboration of figuring out what to do with this. We are not even close to knowing. But I'll give you a couple of examples from the city of Rio. So Rio was obviously on board first, so they've had more time to use the information. But in studying the Waze data, they have already redistributed their garbage collection points because they realized that they were creating congestion in the city. And now they've been able to redistribute the routes and some of the collection points and actually have already shown that they have reduced congestion at that time of day. They are also installing traffic monitoring cameras, and they're able to install them based on real data about how their citizens are really driving. They're understanding what neighborhoods require traffic personnel in different events. So they had 2 elections this past year. How do they need to redistribute traffic personnel based on where traffic really is at that moment? And they're able to dynamically redeploy. And so this is the real stuff. This is where it gets exciting. And we're just embarking on this. But before we continue the conversation with everyone, I'll just show you a video about when Rio first started using Waze and their traffic management center. You can play it.
In Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, traffic is a very important issue. We have almost 7 million people here, going from A to B to C to D.
When we first developed the basic API for working with cities, we gave it to the guys at Core in Rio, and they turned it into something that was incredibly useful for them as a city.
Implementing Waze was something that we've never saw before. From the first phone call that we have, 2 weeks later, we were there inside of Waze application with APIs, bringing to the operations center every information that we agreed to share. Let's take a look at how we use Waze up here. This place here is the crisis room, a place where we handle tough situations. The question is, when we enter the building, what is happening and where? We have here this important road, and people are complaining about heavy traffic. And then we see a picture. We don't only know that they are telling about it, but we can see that it's loaded. We can even make some alerts in our system that will help every operator here to investigate what is happening where. This is one of those reasons that our partnership is so valuable.
We have the channel, we have the data, and we need to shorten the distance between the citizens and the city hall.
It feels like this entire city is structured like a startup, with innovation, with a commitment to excellence and execution all the way down the line. And they're teaching us how we need to improve our APIs so that it can be used for cities around the world.
O centro de operações.
We receive here in the operations center lots of information about the Wazers, and they talk about incidents, hazards, problems in the traffic in terms of moderate or standstill traffic. Those information are very important to us. With 400,000 Wazers in Rio de Janeiro, 50,000 users every day, it's like we have an army of public agents talking to us. With the World Cup and the Olympic Games, we need to maintain the city functioning because there are some people that are not going to the soccer games or to the swimming competition. Waze is one of our ways to make it happen.
There is this effect where because the information is getting better as we have more users, that it just keeps continuing to grow.
As many Wazers that we have, the more this number grows, more efficient and more deeply this tool will work for the city.
Brazil is an incredibly important market for us because they have a ton of users. And the more users we have, the better the data is. That means that we can not just save each individual time, but look at the city as a whole. And this is where we think the next part of our evolution really lies. So I apologize that I'm here in person and you had to see me on the video. I have to figure out how to re-edit that. Anyway, that's the program, and now we can get into the conversation.
Great. So, one of the interesting things about this group is that not only are these companies or organizations capturing data, but I think the real value is that they're finding out a way for people to actively use it, to activate that data. Almost like if the data is there, but we don't do anything with it, it's like a fitness plan or a meal plan that we're not taking advantage of. So, these are the Richard Simmons of the data universe here sitting on stage with us. And one of the questions I have about this idea of activating data is for each one of you, and let's start with Adam, is what's the sort of the core unit of activation or something small that someone can do, whether it's on automatic or outside, that kind of gets them to start using data around the vehicle?
So at the individual level, it's usually a single problem, a single use case that they want. We'll find people trip logging and error logging of their own car is usually where individual developers get excited about that, building their own applications. With companies, or I should say institutions more broadly, it's again a singular problem, but then there tends to be more of an interest in, for company's sake, usually using individual data to drive an individual experience of that company's product more. And at the institutional level, the interest is in aggregate data.
Well, with the array of things, we began as a scientific instrument. And so a lot of the design, besides being driven by the need to put something in a remote place that didn't need any sort of babysitting, we interacted with scientists that had questions about the city that they couldn't answer with existing data. Why people in this neighborhood versus the one next door have a much higher incidence of asthma, for example. And then it sort of evolved to look at opportunities for cities to make decisions about data. For example, we don't know what the temperature differential is across the roughly 600 square kilometers of the city of Chicago. But right now, when we salt the roads in the wintertime, we salt all the roads at the same time. Knowing the surface temperature is extremely interesting to the Department of Transportation, because if they can only place the salt where they need it, it's an environmental win and it's a financial win. As far as individuals go, I showed the Fitbit Notion mock-up. I'd say we're in the stages that Diane talked about. We're putting a platform out there, but how people use it is yet to be seen. So we know it'll be useful to the city, to scientists. We're looking to the innovations community in Chicago and elsewhere to do what we think will be interesting things for individuals.
So from the crowdsourced perspective, the community is at the heart of everything. And I don't think that there was ever a primary motivation to share data. Originally, they wanted to create a map because their city either didn't have one, it wasn't good enough, it was out of date. So the original community members wanted to have a more accurate, better representation of their map. Now, when people use Waze, it's they know that they're sharing, they know that they're helping one another, but really the primary use case now is they're hopefully saving time. They're getting a more efficient route, and I think that that is a much stronger motivation than what we had at the beginning on trying to get people on the platform. Now that we have a lot of data, people are contributing just by getting the benefit of the product. You turn it on, you drive. If you don't touch anything, don't use anything, just get your good route, your real-time route, then you're also contributing.
Great. So building on that, one of the things that, as we've seen from the first panel as well, that we have all this data at our fingertips. And one of the things I'm always wondering about is who's really, from an ethical perspective, who's in charge of using this data? You know, whether you own the data or not, at some point it's in somebody else's hands. And in the financial community, you know, if you manage money for someone, you're seen as a fiduciary, and depending on where you live, you're through regulation, you're certified, or you're, at least they know about you within the state of California if you're going to manage somebody else's money. I've always wondered, you know, what's the terms of service for somebody who's going to manage our data? And we can, these are three very reasonable, smart people on stage, but all the companies that use our data, frankly, we don't have a terms of service for those companies that I know of. And I just wondered if you could all talk about, at least internally within your groups, how you think about the idea of the fact that you're holding on to things which, frankly, are more powerful than a dollar, even though we don't call you a fiduciary.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had an offsite earlier this week and spent time. We have our legal terms of service, which are very lawyered up and written partially in mind with protecting ourselves as a company. But we realized we needed to put things out in human consumable language that stated our principles and how we think about this and wanting to be good stewards of that. So those are not actually on our website yet, but I anticipating this question, I took a screenshot of it that I'm going to just read off of now. So there's 4 major points that we hold very dearly as a company, and in the entire time I've been at Automatic, I've seen this to be true. To decisions that could have financially benefited the company constantly being, pushed aside as absolutely not. That is not in our users' interest. So when we say security is at our core, 4 points. Security is at our core. There's the intended who shouldn't have your data, but there's a bigger question of like, can people maliciously get at it? I mean, if you read, we're talking about cars, there's actually a spate of articles lately about devices in a similar class as ours being hackable, being hacked, letting people take over control of the car, get at the data. And so we're using bank level encryption, military grade, whatever term you want to use. We could get down to the bit level of it, but across every stage of our pipeline, starting with at the manufacturing level, so that even if malicious code wanted to be put in, we have systems in place to safeguard against that. Up through the encrypting the connection between your device and your car, the phone at the cloud, and all the way through. So security, principle number 1. 2, your data is yours to take with you and export and analyze, and it is yours in that sense. It is actually both of ours, right? And so a lot of times people force this singular answer, is it mine or is it yours? I would say it's both in different shades. But it is yours in the sense that anything that is the data exhaust you've produced, you have a right to see and have and do with as you want. But principle 3 sort of answers the ugly thought that could have led to. You choose who has access to your data. And that's probably the crux of it here. Anytime that there is a instance of some third party wanting to consume your individual stream of data, that would be any pathway you've taken, any notions of like this atomic trip unit. That, or the VIN number of your car, for instance, is something we have. That would be only made possible via you opting in, via a sign-in with automatic button, the way that a sign-in with Facebook has, and you get an OAuth screen that says, this application, Waze, maybe we'll do an integration, who knows, would, let's say Waze wants to access these following 4 data fields. Are you okay with that? That's the only way we would pass data to a third party about an individual. The last point, though, gets at where I think a lot of the gray overlap and the questions come up, which is that we do reserve the right to anonymize data to deliver interesting insights to partners to make cities better, or other OEMs who want to understand their own vehicle performance in the field. I don't think that letting somebody know that their car is their field of cars is this much over or under their EPA performance in actuality is really putting an individual's privacy at risk. So that is how we think about it. And I'd be curious.
Before Charlie goes, I just want to let everyone know you can queue up at the microphone, and we'll go to audience questions after this one. Charlie?
So under the hood of our device is a bunch of technology that has evolved over about 10 years, almost 12 years actually, of work that we've been doing in embedded sensing and wearable devices and things like that. And early on in that process, we interacted with a group that was led by Deborah Estrin at UCLA called
I love Deborah.
Yeah, Center for Embedded Network Sensing. And we were, asking her, she was one of the first, they were one of the first groups that was doing things like Waze with phones at the time, which there was only one phone type that could do GPS and background processing. Anyway. Nokia. Yeah, Nokia. So I was, besides technically, I was super impressed with the way that they approached privacy with normal end users. And they said, it's our responsibility, but they said this and did this, our responsibility for the end user to understand what the risks are of them working with us. So that's kind of informed us over the last decade or so, and probably other people as well, that kind of work that they did. And when we transitioned to this project of putting something on the street poles, we took a similar approach, which is that we started talking to the press about it last summer, knowing that we weren't going to have anything on the street for maybe up to a year, because we wanted to start the dialogue with the city of Chicago. We had a series of workshops in neighborhoods to talk about these devices. We designed the devices so that they're conspicuous and sort of friendly looking and not ominous, surveillance looking devices. And then part of the rollout in Chicago, besides the town halls and communities and things like that, is an education program for high school kids that we prototyped last summer. We bring kids in for 2 consecutive Saturdays, teach them about sensing and what kind of science you can do with these devices, and sort of get them to feel a sense of ownership of these devices. And then finally, since everything we're collecting is immediately being published, we think about privacy at the collection stage, which isn't the only way to do it. There's other, it's, in our case, that just forces us to think about privacy at the collection stage. And so at the point that we would begin to introduce, for example, a camera, the principle that we have in the architecture is that the images from that camera aren't going to escape the box. Rather, as I showed, there's a fairly powerful processor dedicated to processing those images. So that will be tricky to communicate that to a normal person on the street, that yes, it's a camera, but, and we have to communicate that in a careful way.
So I think for us, we need to be extra careful, because with a company like ours, if you lose your user trust, you're finished, right? Like I was saying, that the community is at the core. So we've had to be incredibly rigorous. Everything from rolling out invisibility mode within the app, which anyone can set, which means you won't even be shown on the app, And a lot of the really kind of forward thinking sharing that we do, like you can see your Facebook friends, et cetera, was really kind of pulled from us from our users that they want to do that. However, when we get into sharing this information, we've decided that even when you're taking every precaution, which we do, which is truncate your route, you don't see the origin, you don't see the destination, we skew temporally anything that you see on the map. There's a lot of things that we do. We were very kind of out front in that. But we also have to do things like make sure certain data is just not stored. We have to make sure that data, even routing data, it's such a bummer that I can't go back and analyze last year's data because it doesn't exist anymore. It expires, it evaporates, because someone on the last panel mentioned as well, it's not our data in a vacuum that's a problem. It's what data is put together with this that could potentially fill in these gaps. Mm-hmm. And so, so as we think about what we share out with cities, for example, which is the first time we're sharing, we made sure that it was only information that was already available publicly within the app. So just the incidents and the closures, no routing. They want speeds. We can't even give them speeds because we don't have enough confidence in how we're storing the anonymized version of the traces at this point. And already we wouldn't store anything on a route or a speed that doesn't have at least 10 people on it. I mean, there's all kinds of tricks and things that we do, but we err on the side of caution, and in certain cases just either don't store or expire the data and never share.
Great, thanks. We'll go over here.
The chief of the Los Angeles Police Department and representatives of other law enforcement agencies
I wonder who this question is for.
have called on Waze to, I believe, stop allowing users to mark the location of police officers in the application. It's my understanding Waze they've cited concerns for safety of the officers. It's my understanding that Waze has dismissed those concerns and declined to do so. Why?
So just to educate the crowd, 2 policemen in New York City were shot and killed in near Christmas time. And there was a claim that Waze was, had a stalking feature that you could disclose this information. We're partners with the NYPD and have been for a long time. We really care a lot about officer safety. And I'll just give a couple of anecdotes. The reason people have called on us to stop the feature is a lack of education on how it works. We've been very open now about educating anyone who thought that we were a police stalking app or that was a problem. But I'll start with the 2 anecdotes. One from our partner at NYPD, who said, "We wear hats, we write police on the side of our cars, we have red lights. Nothing is more important to the safety of New York City than being able to have people know where they can find us." Extrapolating on that, the Atlantic had an interesting article that talked about this new app similar to Uber where you could have a policeman come to your door, and it's called 911. So not to be flippant, but this is a debate, but it's a debate that stems from a lack of education about the future. And I'll also note that Los Angeles is also a partner, and they continue to be. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a question for Diane as well. I'm really curious how...
Please ask me about something else.
No, I certainly will. I really want to talk a little bit about urban mobility and kind of the ability for Waze to manage congestion and traffic. So one first question is, for example, if there's traffic ahead and let's say Google Maps issues a reroute, do they issue that to everyone? So for example, would Waze only issue it to some people but not to others? And how do you kind of to manage the traffic? But then also longer term, what are some of the plans that you would have towards kind of solving congestion? I mean, you could think of dynamic rerouting, dynamic pricing, kind of smart congestion charging, depending on time of day. The list goes on and on. So just curious what your roadmap looks like and what role you see yourself playing there.
These are the discussions I love having. Okay, so to start with Waze and Google Maps are still very separate. So you'll see that the incidents on Waze will come into there. If you're one of our map editors, you'll see that you have Street View for validating your places that you want to add, that kind of thing now. But the two products are separate. And so to get to the routing question, I can't speak to anything. I don't know about how Google does their routing on GMM. Ours has an algorithm that will look at the overall load on the roads like a server, like load balancing of a server. And so very literally, if you are two people in a car using Waze, you might get different routes because it's based on penalties for different things. So it would have to be very bad traffic for multiple people to, for example, be driven down a side road, for example, because there's a penalty for going on a road that's not a highway, just algorithmically. It's purely algorithmic in that way. So yes, you could get a completely different route depending on what the traffic is doing. The idea is that we look at distributing traffic overall so that all of the speeds would go down in a certain metro. Related to where I think this is going to go, you may have seen that there was traffic levels over time in each of those images that I showed. So in LA, for example, it's super interesting because they have in the morning a big spike, in the afternoon a big spike. That means that there's not a capacity problem. They have enough roads. But what we're working on with Los Angeles is figuring out how do you distribute them by time. The interesting thing about working with a community approach, the crowdsourcing approach, is that we can start to look at incentives. We have knowledge predictively about, okay, you can save 30 minutes in your commute if you leave at this time. So looking at how we can distribute by time is important. In a place like Rio or even Jakarta, it goes up and then it stays up until midnight. They have a capacity problem, and so what we should be looking at is how to get fewer drivers on the road, and they can't scale, they can't add more roads, right? So it's a very different set of challenges, which is cool about working with the different departments around the world.
Over here.
Karthik Krishna, and my question is actually a good segue from what I was asked before. If you look at the future of transportation, surely a more sustainable way to do it is through the use of increased public transportation. So are any of you focused on perhaps using data to drive people more towards using public transportation, maybe improve the value proposition for those who do that?
So, we haven't yet. In fact, we are not at all multimodal. We're completely focused on the driver and efficiencies there. We have no plans to change that, but I do think that most cities are looking at multimodal approaches, and then what we'll try to do is, as we work with more and more cities, figure out what is going to be the best approach, but also to provide them with enough information to figure out where there's really a need. Public transportation is super important, but it's just not at the scale where we need it to be. It's very expensive. It's not at the customer level, it's at the infrastructure level. And so I think it's going to take us quite some time. It also can't be as dynamically responsive. So I think you'll need both for sure. I by no means want to create more cars on the road. I'd like a bigger percentage to be using Waze. And I think that that would have a positive impact. But we're big fans of public transportation and just having overall congestion reduction.
Do you have something to say? I can speak to that as well. So, Automatic's perspective, we're a company of 60 people, and I think we don't have a philosophy that public transportation shouldn't be a big part of future city solutions, but we just have finite resources to chase with our scope. So. We are likewise focused on the vehicle, the individual vehicle level. But I would say there's an interesting cut if you expand the definition of public transportation or just look at the goal of reducing the number of cars that need to be out there or need to be on the road. There's a changing model of car ownership, right? That you're starting to see with the Ubers and Lyfts of the world and the Zip cars and relay rides and get around and all of those sorts of services that are dissociating this classic notion that the primary driver of a car is the person who owns it, or the primary passenger of a car is the one who owns it. And so Automatic has a role to play in that, where we can, I wouldn't say it's a core principle of ours to get more cars off the road the way sort of Uber has stated that as one of their core things. But many applications that I can see us driving that we would be thrilled to be a part of focus on just at the individual level, reducing traffic and carbon emissions, and then, bubbling up to ride sharing and ride sharing drivers and what we can do for them to make that experience better, to make that more profitable for them, so that encourages more people to make the shift from being a car owner to a Uber Lyft user. We have as well the carpooling matching thing I touched on earlier is a big use case that we could possibly have to help reduce congestion and emissions and sort of make a step in that direction.
We have time for one more question. So.
Hi, my name is Christopher, and when I was a kid, I had asthma, so I applaud all these kind of things where you're trying to do to improve the environment and keep it clean. And lately, I've become a fan of electric cars because they're a nice thing. So my question is actually to all of you, like, how are you seeing the incentives? Because we get a sticker from state of California, that's great, but I think data can give us even more kind of nice things for encouraging electric cars, reducing range anxiety, keeping the air clean, and so on.
So I can start since I work at an energy lab. So one of the things Argonne does is battery technology, not just the cells themselves, but the control systems. And the thing I would say about electric cars is that they're enabled by technology that is on an exponential. And so like our computers and other things that are on exponentials, you have to sort of look at the curve and not so much look at today's version of that technology. So we see things going electric, pretty definitively. And so in terms of incentives and things like that, if you step back and think from the point of view of the federal government, if you know that electric vehicles are going to continue to get cheaper because of technology, not just because of the vehicles themselves, then that would also tell you, at what point an intervention like a rebate or a tax incentive makes sense, and at what point it's not necessary because it's just an inevitable thing that's going to happen. The solar is the same way.
Great. Thanks very much to our panelists, and thank you all.